Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. He always comes up with these nuggets of insight that move your life forward if you're looking to up your professional game, whether you are a leader, whether you want to be a leader. Today, we're going to talk about leadership lessons that nobody talks about. I'm intrigued. I'm not even sure where this is going to go. I'm confident it's going to be very impactful because every time we've gotten together, it has been. And this is what he does. He finds those things that we're missing to move our lives professionally forward. In terms of coaching, he's an author. By the way, fantastic book called Arrive, Drive, and Thrive, where a lot of what we talk about comes from. Saterman connected his company out of New York City, and he is the CEO, the man behind it. Josh Saterman joins us. How are you doing today?
I am excellent. I'm chuckling. I love your intros. You make me feel good about myself, so thank you.
They're real, though. That's the thing. People say, you script that? I'm like, no, I'm just thinking just based on what we've talked about and what we're going to get into today. Sometimes I have an idea of the direction it's going to go in. I don't, fill in the blanks, and you do that. Today, I'm blank. I'm like, there's just one big blank. I don't even know, right? So, like, we could say we've learned a lot along the way in terms of professional life and leadership. I'd have to think about it, honestly. I'd have to really apply my brain to that. Where do we start? Is there a category we start in? Is it dealing, let's say, conflict? The category is like Jeopardy. The category is conflict. And the lessons that nobody talks about that come from leadership. You tell me.
Maybe. I think conflict is a place. I think it's more common. I think some of the nuggets I've learned are like a bit under the radar, like where I say it to people and they go, oh yeah, but like it doesn't come to mind. So the first thing I always share with people, leadership life lessons, is if you're in a current senior leadership role and you think back to all of the experiences you've had, there are two buckets that I typically put those experiences in. One is technical skills and one is critical skills, right? Like if you're a doctor, a technical skill is, if you're a surgeon, you better know how to use a scalpel. Otherwise, you should not be operating, right? So technical skills, critical skills, active listening, serving as a mentor, understanding your role as a sponsor or an advocate for an employee that works with you or a colleague that works alongside you. So I say this because one of the more popular things I talk about with senior executives when they're feeling less than. Everyone as a human has a moment where you might feel less than, right? And I say, well, how many years have you been working on your leadership skills? 30 years in the making, CEOs. He comes to me and he says, or she comes to me, a lot of times it's he, comes to me and says, confidentially, I'm not confident. And please forgive my language. I'm like, well, no shit. Who have you talked about in the last 12 coaching sessions with me that's actually lifting you up? Who's surrounding you with those critical skills, right? So I share that because life lessons or most valuable lessons, or where do we start in this? And some of it is just like take a deep breath, right? No matter how high you sit, you still sit on your tush. And so at the end of the day, part one is can you allow yourself the grace of self-awareness, and then can you allow yourself the determination of self-management? And so that's a most valuable lesson I learned very early on, is even though I teach this stuff, I still learn every day. Even though I raise the bar and I achieve that bar, I raise the bar again. And that's not because I'm a perfectionist. That's because we're in growth mindset and we're learning every day. And so I have to start before I even get to trust or conflict or accountability or results, or because that is a most valuable leadership lesson I learned very early on, is humility allows you to have growth mindset. You don't have to have all the answers. You have to be willing to find all the answers. And there's a difference.
A friend of mine told me that suggested when I was in having a situation, made some big changes, when you're at your lowest point, you're the most humble. And that's where you're open to receive and get everything that's coming your way, and just really absorb it. The thing I'm really taking away here, Josh, the critical skills, it seems like it is critical that we connect. We continue to connect. We strive to connect. Don't stop. Many of us, half the week working from home, maybe all the time from home, whatever it may be, keep pushing forward to make those connections. And then I feel that the important thing is the follow up. Yeah, you can go to networking meetings, meet somebody. Hey, how's it going? Maybe somebody who knows somebody. Oh, good. Blah, blah, blah. But if you don't nurture that new connection, it doesn't go anywhere. And what I'm hearing here is it's work. It's work. You got to work it. You got to work at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the other life lesson or most valuable lesson or, some moment that became pivotal is I remember being quite young in my career and I'm not even sure, Steve, how to say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it in the best way I can. I identify as a white man. I love being a white man. There's nothing wrong with being a white man. I'm in the DEI space. I'm in the inclusive leadership space. So for those listeners that are listening, I'm very proud of that. There's nothing wrong with anybody in this world unless there's extremes, which we're not going to talk about today, right? But in the business world, I was surrounded by a lot of tall, white, straight men, and I don't identify as straight. I certainly don't identify as tall. I'm 5'4" on a tall day when I stretch with basketball weights against the hoop. So I'm short. I'm a short guy.
5'7". So listen, I'm
there you go, right?
challenged vertically myself.
But my mom used to always say good things come in small packages, and in this case, I'm like a diamond, right? It's compact and brilliant. And so, but as a younger leader, and I don't mean younger in terms of just age, I also mean it in terms of hierarchy, title, space, responsibility, P&L, right? When you think about this in the business context, you sit at that conference table and quite literally, the chair you're sitting in is built for a 6-foot man. So even for those men on this call that are 5'8" or short, and women are probably sitting here chuckling because they're in a dress, they're trying to sit cross-legged, they're trying to figure out a way to sit comfortably. And I bring this up as a most valuable leadership lesson because I had to learn very early on, get comfortable in your own skin. If the chair doesn't work for you, bring your own fucking chair. And I say that with so much confidence. Get your own chair, right? Take your leadership by the hand and yank it where you want it. I allowed for too long people above me in terms of hierarchy to tell me that they were the catalysts, that they were the experts, that they were the ones that were going to make the difference. And then I met a mentor of mine after the first mentor of mine that became a sponsor of mine. And she was like 5'2" on a tall day. And I watched her dominate the room. I watched the way she gave and take space. She gave space and she took space. And in that way, there was a little bit of an aha for me around how do I carve out my niche, my spot at that table. And there was room at that table for all. The other thing within that most valuable leadership lesson is I wasn't trying to kick somebody else out of the table in order to place myself at the table. I just made the table bigger. And when that table got bigger, there were better ideas, there were smarter conversations, and then in that way, we embraced different levels of conflict. Conflict is not a 4-letter word. It's not a bad word. Conflict means that there's differences of opinion. And how do we harness that? How do we listen to it more powerfully? So if I had to summarize what I just said is how do you build your confidence? Staying in humility, staying out of the space of ego and arrogance, and in the space of growth mindset. B is how do you really sit at the table and carve out a space for yourself without sacrificing somebody else's seat. And then thirdly, which we'll get into shortly, Steve, is how do you embrace the idea of different ideas? What are the ways that you can show up and allow for healthy discussion in the space of advancing a strategic initiative, advancing a goal, hitting a KPI? What are the ways you bring truth talk to a conversation? Most valuable leadership lessons.
It very impactful. My mind is spinning. I'm getting images of situations and people. The word conflict is heavy, right? But you put a positive light on it where it's just a difference of opinion. But how many of us say, "Mom, I avoid conflict"? Is that okay to say you avoid conflict? I don't think it is, based on what you just said.
The coach in me, Steve, the coach in me says it's okay to say anything you want. The question is what do you want out of the comment you just said, right? So for those that come to me and say, I'm conflict averse, I don't like conflict. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So then how do you want to lead around that? What are the ways you want to be an impactful leader and be conflict averse? What does that look like for you? So I don't think it's always about changing who you are. Sometimes it's about just self-awareness and acknowledgement. The question, though, is how will it serve you? How will it hold you back? I ask these questions. I am very consistent in my coaching. How will it serve you? How will it hold you back? Let's talk through that. Where is your threshold for being uncomfortable and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone? So there are things I'm very open to having conflict around, and there are parts that I'm actually less comfortable with conflict, right? Like I say all the time,
you can't avoid it, Josh. That's it.
You can't.
I look at it this way. We are our own cars and we're piloting forward.
Yeah.
Conflict ahead. You know, my car, it actually says pothole. Actually, it doesn't even pronounce it well. Pothole. And it's like, you know, sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not, but that means something's up ahead, a conflict.
Yeah.
So what do? So you can steer around it.
Yeah.
You can't always avoid it.
That's right.
So when there's conflict ahead, don't make a right turn and you're not going to, why would you go around halfway through the city and around the other way because of a situation in front of you? No, you carefully steer around it. So for me, that says you listen differently. If you are not a fan of dealing with conflict, you pull out the empathetic side of you and just deal with it that way, kind of massage it. I want to go back to something you said a few moments ago, and it brought images up of people I'm connected to. One in particular, he's a superstar. He doesn't even realize what he's got. And when he's up doing his thing, he brings it. But he can't get out of his own way. And we have a term in this group that I'm in, you know, those who are supportable. We all say, even to his face, are you supportable? Like, we can't, if you're not gonna realize where, you know, your challenges are in terms of, you know, he's got focus issues and all. He's a superstar. 1 million people would want to be him. He's a good-looking guy. He's the most dapper dresser anywhere. However, he's got financial issues. You know, people don't know the other side of him, but he just can't get out of his own way in terms of maybe the leadership thing. Do you feel that many of us don't realize what we're holding on to, what we have? So many great things, but we don't realize it, or we minimize it. Or we look in the mirror and say, man, I suck. No, you don't. But we don't realize it. You feel a lot of us are kind of walking that direction.
You said a couple of things that are so powerful, Steve. So let's start with what you just said, and I'll work my way backwards. Number one is, Steve, I have to say, for all the reasons, it's the toughest thing I do as a coach is draw that line between therapy and coaching. Because I'm not a licensed therapist. And at the same time, as coaches, for any of the executive coaches that are listening to this podcast, it's one of the toughest things we do is walk that line and try to support people with lack of confidence. In a prior podcast, we even talked about imposter syndrome, right? Am I good enough? Right? That's what that means. Am I good enough? So I don't know where your friend is on this journey of, again, self-awareness, self-management, and in that space, allowing for the grace of both humility and growing confidence. But the reality is that most people, because again, we've got that sage and saboteur sides of our brain, and we're biometrically trained to think first, fight, flight, fright. And so how do you, again, where is it serving you? Where is it holding you back? And how do you lean into that feeling of uncomfortability when that fight or fright or flight starts to settle in? What is the narrative you're giving to yourself? And that's why I go back to when I was, earlier in my career, and somebody would say, "Oh, that guy over there, that guy is a catalyst. He's a catalyst. He's the guy to watch."
Hmm.
And I would step back and I would say, I don't want to be that guy. That guy who's 6'4" and from Utah, and like I don't want to be that guy. That's not who I am. So if that's the definition of success, I'm going to keep failing because I can't be that. I have to be me. What is my secret sauce? Where do I show up as a catalyst? Whether or not people around me agree or disagree, right? How do I stay true to myself? So for this individual, for any other folks that are listening or watching, I would start with saying, well, what do you bring? What is your secret sauce? What are the ingredients you offer? That's your specialty. Stay there. Grow the crap out of that. Strength-based leadership says, don't start with your weakness. Don't start with your lesser talents. Start with what you bring to a party every single time. Some people bring fruit plates and they make the most delicious fruit plates ever. Some people pick the best wine. Some people know how to make a charcuterie board with the best salami. Some people don't do any of that stuff, but they dress really, really well and they bring amazing party favors. It all adds to the party. It all adds to the experience.
Or they bring
what is
their
your
energy,
secret sauce?
or they bring their energy.
Absolutely.
That could be off the scale. You should always bring something to a party. I get that.
Absolutely.
But if you're that, just people love seeing, hey, how you doing? How's it going? Like, geez, bring that on.
That's why we start there. We start there because confidence is a real human dynamic. It's not a challenge. It's challenge accepted. Challenge accepted. We're humans. We're going to at times feel a little less than or off or anxious. So then how do you take a deep breath and sort of see through that, again, without having therapy background or psychology background? As cheesy as it sounds, breathe through it. So when you brought up conflict, what I found myself thinking about is context around conflict. Ryan Holiday wrote a beautiful book that I absolutely adore. Anyone that coaches with me gets a copy, essentially. So you're welcome, Ryan Holiday. I'm supporting your business. Hopefully you can send Arrive, Drive, Thrive. That'll be nice. But right. but the book is called The Obstacle is the Way. And I share that because I love this idea of touching the obstacle, tasting the obstacle, feeling it out, walking around it, looking under it, climbing over it. I like where you said, it doesn't make sense to always make a right turn and go the other direction. And yet, I will say this also, Steve, for those people on our call that are thinking about this idea of conflict, not every conflict needs to be solved for. We have to, as leaders, again, you talk about most valuable leadership lessons. Another mentor in my life, a really amazing author. I have to give credit to her, Mita Malik. Mita Malik has written amazing books. She's another one coming out shortly. And essentially what Mita is talking about is this idea of your own decision making. Where do you put up with certain things? Where do you accept certain things? Where do you push back on certain things? Part of conflict is also knowing when to say, this is the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. The wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. As a leader, when do you know when it's emphasis and syllable or emphasis and syllable, and that's going to give you a distraction? When do you know as a leader when conflict is something to lean into? And so let's give some hows. Number one is keep looking for the source and not the symptom. Somebody says to me, my direct report is not listening to me. What does that mean? Well, I talk to them and I talk to them and I talk to them and I give them all this information and they leave the room and they come back and they've only got 90% of it done. They're not listening. Okay, well, what's the forum like? What are you doing? Well, I knock on their office door, and sometimes they're on a call, or sometimes they're on a Zoom, and I ask them to take a thoughtful pause, and I say to them, right, blah, 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 and I basically I vomit on them. They're in the middle of doing something, and then I leave the room. Well, is the source that they're not listening, or is the source that you aren't creating a moment of clarity for you and that individual to connect and understand what the objectives are? You're not giving space to understand what is required to deliver what you're asking of. And a lot of times that boss, that coaching client will kind of recoil and, right, it's that self-awareness. It's what are you doing to offer deeper connection? So before we get to the symptom of they're not listening, the source is, are you creating environments where active listening can be present?
Do you find that that's where the tapping into your empathy comes through? To realize what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how they're processing whatever you vomited, what you're saying. And you're not really looking at like you said, like we go to the doctor, what do?
Yeah.
What do? They treat the symptom. They don't go to the root cause. They just don't. That could be a whole 15 podcasts.
That's another conversation.
Yes. And there are financial reasons for that. But it's usually we're not looking for the root cause. Why is that person not getting it done? Why is it 90% done? They left at 10%. What's going on there? How would you rephrase that? That's the situation. You open the door. Excuse me, can we talk for just one sec here? What would you say? And again, every situation is different. I get that.
If I was sitting in the seat of the recipient of the information, and this is, again, dependent on your boss. Again, I've said this before on another podcast. There are unfortunately shitty bosses out there. The purpose of this podcast is so that you don't emulate that shitty behavior. The first thing I say to people all the time is, your information is very important to me, and I would like to really listen to what you're sharing. I'm right in the middle of a meeting. May I come knock on your door in the next 5 or 10 minutes? I'll try to end a little early to give us some time to sit and chat. I'd like to make sure I'm fully present for this conversation.
Fair enough.
Now, again, a good boss or a good partner, colleague, director, a good partner, right? This goes back to conflict. A good partner will be like, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'll see you in a few minutes, right? Or I'm not available in 5 minutes. I'm running to a meeting, but I can meet you in an hour. Okay, great. I'll work on my calendar to try to shift my meeting, push it back 15 minutes. I'll come to you in an hour. So how do you meet people where they're at? If there's a sense of urgency, right? What do you do to rise to that sense of urgency to meet that? So again, we're going to lean into that affirmative. Now, if the person says, no, I need to talk to you now, that's a different level of conflict, right? So conflict is like feedback. We hear these words and we recoil. But the reality is that you don't know what's happening for that boss. I have an expression again. This is the New Yorker in me today. My language is real sharp. The crude expression, unfortunately, is shit flows downhill. The chair of the board shits on the CEO. The CEO feels pressure. The CEO then shits on the C-suite. The C-suite feels pressure. The C-suite, you see where this is going.
Starts
right?
at the top. That's it, essentially.
So I, again, talk about confidence, right? As this buyer, as this vice president, as this head of, right? Like I was taking the storm from above me and I was doing this. Oh my God, I'm failing. Well, wait a minute. It has nothing to do with you. Has to do with what's going on in this trickle-down effect. And so how do you look back up again and say, oh my gosh, you need something too, right? It's not just all about me as a direct report. Sometimes it's about my boss. How do I support my boss? And so this goes back to most valuable leadership lessons early on when I started to introduce myself to new C-suite, to new senior executives, is how do you like to learn? What do you expect of me? How can I support you? I want us to win together. What does winning together look like? So I go back to when we talk about conflict, sometimes what conflict is solving for things from two different lenses. You're standing on the north side of the room looking south. I'm on the south side. I'm looking north. I might see the exact same object you're seeing, but from a different lens. So when we talk about this idea of how do we handle tough conversations, let's take a pause and say, what are you seeing in this? What am I seeing in this? Yes, now let's talk about how we see it together. Now let's rotate. Let's turn the object. Let's figure it out. So I bring that to the conversation today because successful leaders, sometimes what they say to me is, God, I wish I knew this 30 years ago. So part of the reason why we wrote Arrive, Drive, Thrive is why do you have to wait as a manager to be the chief X, whatever that is, to be able to learn this? This is not access for the few, right? You can be an amazing leader as the manager, as the director. If you start to think about some of these concepts and think about how they impact your conversations or communication, your collaboration, your sense of commitment to wake up in the morning and feel good about your job and tackle these, complexities. They don't have to be conflicts. They can be complexities or different lenses, right? So how do we start to train our brains to start thinking a little differently so that when we show up, we can be curious, we can embrace change because it will happen every day. 5 C's of effective leadership, right? Collaborate, communicate, commit, change, and curious, right? So this goes all back to how we bring connection into the workplace. And these are some of the valuable learning lessons, leadership lessons I've learned along the journey.
Can I have those C's? You've said them before. I put it on a Post-it note. I truly want to share it, that it came from you. It's here, but
I'm always happy, Steve.
Fire away once more, please.
Always. Communication, collaboration, commitment, curiosity, and change.
Love it.
And again, if you think about the name of our company, Saterman aside, that's a whole nother subject for a different podcast. But our company is really about connection, right? Leadership is about connection. Organizations, think of the root of it, organism, right? It's an organization. It's multiple cells, multiple functions, this takes connection, right? The liver and the pancreas do have a connection, right? So when we break it down to its most simplest form, in order to create connection, we need healthy communication and active collaboration, true commitment to the work, to the purpose and the values of our organization. We need to embrace change because it's going to happen. Stagnation is the death of organizations. And ultimately, we have to stay curious, ask a million questions, know the data, right? And so these 5 C's come together in a beautiful umbrella to create this gorgeous tree of connection. And that's why we love the work that we do every day.
Connection is my takeaway personally from this. We don't realize how important it is. We think we may be connecting, but probably not. Even when you open the door, I need to talk with you, 90% is getting done, 10% isn't. How are you connecting? And I love what you said before in terms of dealing with that situation, with that person. You're working it out instead of saying, no, just give me a minute here. 10% is not getting done right away. Somebody's tuning out. Josh, you bring such a fresh perspective on all of this.
Thank you.
You really do. And you make it exciting. Like, I'm excited to write these down and then share it because it's so important. Like
Thank you.
The 5 C's it's everything. And you backed it up. Yeah. You didn't even need to. Just looking at those words when they're all grouped together in terms of being an effective leader, it's all there. It is there. And so much more. It's funny, Arrive, Drive, Thrive. I used the car analogy before. There's the drive. I wasn't even thinking about it. It wasn't even intentional, but maybe subconsciously it was. I don't know. Love all of this. How do we find you? How do we connect with you?
SatermanConnect.com, SATERMAN, connect.com, LinkedIn, Instagram, pigeon carrier, can with a string on the end.
Smoke signals.
Call us. Call us. Smokes at flares. I respond to all kinds of communication. But in all seriousness, all right, shoot us an email. Give us a call. We'd love to connect with you. We'd love to learn more about your organizations and how we can support your organization's leadership journey. And so, but look at our conversation today, Steve. We took the conversation of conflict and we turned it into this word connection. We just gave it a new lens. So
right.
hopefully folks reach out to us so we can bring that magic to your organizations as well.
And conflict doesn't sound so dirty anymore.
Nope. Just perspective, just lens.
Perspective. Yeah. Josh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Oh. Absolutely. Thank you, Steve.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Let's go inside the mind of a 10-year-old.
I should have worn those earrings today. I like those earrings. Gabby has those awesome earrings. I need to ask her where she got those, but that's just what she would want me to do. I'll have Michaela ask her for me.
Buckle up, Sarah.
Yeah, but then Michaela will be like, why don't you just ask her yourself? That's just like Michaela.
Sarah, buckle up.
Michaela's such a great name. I wish I was called Michaela. There's like a dozen Sarahs in my class.
Hey, we're not hitting the road until you buckle up, honey.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. I forget sometimes because my brain is like busy, I wonder if there's pizza at school today.
Sometimes it can be tough to get through to your kids, but it's not impossible. Always make sure they're wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Remember, you have the keys, you have the power. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.